When 73-year-old Margaret stood in her living room, surrounded by 40 years of memories, she had exactly 24 hours before the moving truck arrived. Her children lived on the other side of the country. Her husband had passed away 2 years earlier, and every room of her 3-bedroom home was full. Closets, drawers, basement, garage, a lifetime of accumulation pressing in on her from every wall. What happened next surprised everyone, including her own family. Margaret didn't just clear her entire home in 24 hours. She walked out of it feeling lighter than she had felt in decades, not exhausted, not heartbroken, free. The secret wasn't willpower, and it certainly wasn't a dumpster. It was 9 Japanese organization methods she had learned almost 40 years earlier and had nearly forgotten. Methods that quietly go against almost everything Western decluttering advice has told you. And here's what I need you to know before we begin. Method number 3, the one Margaret almost skipped because it sounded too simple, turned out to be the one that changed everything, not her house, her life. So stay with me, because when we reach number 3, I want you to remember this moment. It will change how you see every single object in your home. First, you should know that Margaret wasn't naturally organized, quite the opposite. In the early 1980s, she and her husband Frank spent 3 years in Kobe, Japan for his work. Their neighbor was a small, silver-haired woman named Mrs. Tanaka, who kept a home so calm and so effortless that Margaret once asked her, half-joking, how many hours a day she spent cleaning. Mrs. Tanaka laughed and said something Margaret never forgot. "I don't clean. My home knows where everything belongs. I just let it return." 40 years later, standing alone in a house that had become a museum of memories she couldn't bear to touch, Margaret remembered Mrs. Tanaka. And with the moving truck coming at 9 the next morning, she decided to trust those old lessons completely. What she discovered is that these methods work especially well for seniors, for people dealing with a lifetime of possessions, limited energy, and deep emotional attachments, because they were never designed for people with endless stamina. They were designed for people with wisdom. Have you ever felt paralyzed by the thought of clearing your own home? Drop a comment and tell me your biggest obstacle. I read every single one. Let's begin with number 9. 9. Danshari, refuse, discard, separate. Danshari is built from 3 Japanese characters: Dan, to refuse; sha, to discard; rai, to separate yourself from attachment. It is not a cleaning technique. It is a triage system. And Margaret used it exactly the way a doctor uses triage in an emergency room. Doctors don't spend equal time on every patient. You cannot spend equal time on every possession. This single shift is what saved Margaret from the analysis paralysis that had kept her stuck for 2 entire years. Here is how she applied it. 15 minutes per room, no more, dividing everything into 3 honest categories. Category 1, I cannot live without this. Medications, documents, a few true comfort objects, the 1 teacup she used every single morning. Category 2, I might need it someday. Category 3, I haven't touched it in over a year. Now here's the part Western advice never tells you, and the part that makes danshari so powerful. Category 2 gets treated like Category 3, because might need it someday is not planning. It is fear wearing a sensible disguise. Mrs. Tanaka used to say that a drawer full of someday is a drawer full of worry. Margaret gave herself permission to be wrong about a few items rather than stay trapped by indecision about all of them. She started in the kitchen, because the kitchen is where necessity is most obvious. In 15 minutes, she discovered she owned 23 coffee mugs, and she only drinks tea now. 3 complete sets of china untouched since her daughter's wedding in 1987. Enough gadgets to stock a small restaurant, including a bread maker she had used exactly twice in 10 years. The separation was swift and calm. 2 mugs stayed. The china went to a donation box. 90% of the gadgets followed. And something unexpected happened. With each room, the fear got quieter. Margaret realized that keeping everything just in case had never made her feel secure. It had made her feel guarded, anxious every time she opened a closet. By the third room, she wasn't bracing herself anymore. She was curious to see how light the next room could become. What's your biggest someday category? The one quietly taking over your space? Kitchen gadgets? Clothes from another decade? Tell me in the comments, because naming it out loud is the beginning of separating from it. 8. Jupun no ma. 10 minutes of space. In Japanese aesthetics, there is a concept called ma, the meaningful pause, the space between things that gives everything else its shape. Mrs. Tanaka applied it to work itself. Never push past the pause. And this is where Margaret discovered something crucial that almost no decluttering advice acknowledges. Seniors have roughly 10 minutes of clear, emotional decision-making energy before mental fatigue sets in. After that threshold, every choice becomes heavier and you start keeping things simply because deciding has become exhausting. So Margaret set a timer for exactly 10 minutes per small area. Not per room, per area. 1 closet shelf, 1 kitchen drawer, 1 bathroom cabinet. When the timer rang, she stopped. Immediately, even mid-drawer. This sounds almost too gentle to work in 24 hours. It is precisely why it worked. In 10 minutes, you cannot overthink. You are forced to trust your instincts, and your instincts already know what you need. The time pressure stops being your enemy and becomes your ally. Her bedroom dresser was the first test. Top drawer, 10 minutes. She found expired medications from 1998, 17 pens that no longer wrote, greeting cards from names she barely remembered, and instruction manuals for appliances she had thrown away years ago. 1 focused sprint, 1 full bag, and a drawer that could suddenly breathe. But the real genius was in the stopping. Between sessions, she made tea. She sat by the window. She rested, without guilt, because rest was part of the method, not a failure of it. And the sessions added up faster than she believed possible. By early evening, she had completed more than 20 10-minute sessions. Hours of focused clearing, and she was energized instead of depleted. That is ma. The empty minutes were doing half the work. Are you someone who tries to attack an entire room at once, then gives up overwhelmed? Tell me honestly in the comments how that usually ends. I suspect Margaret's old story will sound familiar. 7. Tannin no mi, the eyes of a stranger. This one is gentle in name and ruthless in effect. Margaret imagined that a complete stranger, kind, practical, unsentimental, would be the one going through her belongings. And for every hesitation, she asked a single question. Would this stranger understand why I kept this? It sounds almost cold. It is actually liberating. Because when you imagine someone else's eyes on your possessions, the fog of guilt and obligation lifts, and you see objects with sudden clarity. A stack of magazines from 2003? A stranger recycles them without a flicker of doubt. 47 decorative candles never once lit because of a lifelong caution about open flames. A stranger sends them to someone who will actually strike a match. Margaret took Tannin no mi into the hardest territory first, the sentimental boxes. Her children's elementary school artwork, box after box of crayon suns and finger-painted families, sweet, meaningful. And would a stranger keep 200 drawings? Of course not. She kept the 10 pieces that truly captured who her children were, the ones that made her laugh out loud, and released the rest. Then came the photo albums, 23 of them, heavy with blurry vacation shots, duplicates, and faces she could no longer name. Through the stranger's eyes, the truth was plain. Most of these photographs meant nothing to anyone, and if she was honest, many no longer meant much to her. She condensed 23 albums into 3 beautiful ones that actually told her story. 3 albums she would open with joy. Instead of 23, she opened out of duty. The wardrobe followed. Teaching suits from a career that ended 15 years ago. Would a stranger keep professional clothes for a woman happily retired for over a decade? Out they went, to young teachers just starting out. And then the bookshelves. Over 300 books read once and never to be read again. The stranger's verdict was quiet and clear. Shelves of unread books aren't a library. They are storage wearing an educational excuse. Here is why this method matters so deeply for seniors. Most of us don't keep things because we love them. We keep them because letting go feels like a judgment on our past. The stranger's eyes remove the judgment. What remains is a simpler question. Does this object serve my life today? What's the one category in your home that would make absolutely no sense to a stranger? Be brave in the comments. We all have one. 6. Gyaku Mottainai. Waste reversed. You may have heard of Mottainai, the beautiful Japanese principle of not wasting what still has value. But Mrs. Tanaka taught Margaret its reverse side, the side almost nobody talks about. An object that sits unused in a dark closet is being wasted right now. Keeping it isn't respecting it. Keeping it is the waste. This reversal demolished Margaret's biggest fear, the one that keeps most seniors surrounded by boxes for decades. What if I need this someday and can't replace it? So for every item she hesitated over, she asked 3 honest questions. 1. If I needed this exact thing tomorrow, could I realistically get another? 2. What would it actually cost to replace? 3. In the last 5 years, how many times have I truly needed it? Take her 12 screwdrivers scattered across 4 junk drawers. Could she get a screwdriver tomorrow? From any hardware store, any neighbor? Cost of a whole new set? A few dollars? Time she had needed more than 1 screwdriver in 5 years? 0. 1 good screwdriver stayed. 11 found new homes where they would finally be used, where their value would stop being wasted. The dining chairs in the basement told the same story. Stored for years in case of a big dinner party, while she hadn't hosted more than 4 people since Frank's retirement. If a large gathering ever came, chairs could be borrowed or rented for less than the quiet daily cost of storing them, the space, the dust, the small weight on her mind every time she went downstairs. And then the deeper realization arrived, the one that changes everything. Margaret understood she had been paying for these objects for years, paying in space, in cleaning, in mental noise, as insurance against spending $20 once. The mathematics of just in case had never made sense. She had simply never done the math. By the time she reached the craft supplies, dried paints, yarn for sweaters never started, fabric from a hobby that ended quietly a decade ago, the questions answered themselves. If she ever wanted to paint again, fresh paints would serve her better than crusted ones. The old supplies weren't preserving possibilities. They were occupying the room where a possibility could actually live. What are you storing right now that you could replace for under $20 if you ever even needed it? Put it in the comments. Let's do the honest math together. 5. Kino Haibun, the allocation of energy. Here is a truth about clearing a home later in life that nobody says out loud. Your energy is precious, and it is finite. Kai is the Japanese word for life energy. Haibun means allocation. Mrs. Tanaka's principle was simple: never spend the same energy on unequal things. Most people fail at decluttering because they agonize equally over everything. A chipped mixing bowl receives the same deliberation as a mother's handwritten letters. By noon, they are emotionally spent, and they quit, keeping everything just to end the torture of choosing. Margaret refused to make that mistake. She created a simple scale in her mind, from 1 to 10. A 1 deserved 0 emotional energy, into the donation box without a second glance. A 10 deserved real care, proper protection, a place of honor in her new home. Everything in between got exactly the attention its number earned, and not 1 ounce more. Her bookshelves showed the scale in action. Paperback novels read once, ones. Gone without ceremony. Frank's technical manuals. A 30 seconds to decide her son might want them, then boxed. Her grandmother's handwritten cookbook, flour still ghosting the pages, a 9. She cleaned it gently, wrapped it, and set it with the things that would ride beside her in the car, not in the truck. Then the closet, the room she had dreaded most. 67 pieces of clothing crowded into a space meant for 30, while she actually wore about 12. Through Kino Haibun, most of it rated a 1 or a 2. The few pieces she loved, the ones she felt like herself in, rated 8 and above. The entire closet was finished in 45 minutes. Not the weekend she had feared. 45 minutes. And here is the quiet discovery inside this method. The objects stealing the most of Margaret's energy were almost never the ones that mattered. She had spent years worrying about decorative things no visitor ever noticed, while the real thieves, the crowded drawers, the doubled-up gadgets, the closet that fought back every morning, drained her a little every single day. When she stopped spending energy on what didn't matter, she suddenly had energy left over. For phone calls, for laughter, for the move itself. Which objects in your home are taking energy without giving anything back? Name your energy thieves in the comments. Sometimes naming them is all it takes. 4. Genkan no Yakusoku, the promise of the Genkan. Every Japanese home has a Genkan, the small entryway where the outside world and the inside world meet, where shoes come off and the street stays behind. It is a threshold, and thresholds are sacred. Mrs. Tanaka's rule was this: once something crosses the Genkan on its way out, it never comes back in. Margaret turned her own front hallway into a Genkan for her entire 24 hours. The promise had 2 parts. First, every item she decided to release had to physically reach the hallway within the hour. Not later. Not after I finish this room. Within the hour, so the decision became visible and real. Second, everything in the hallway left the house within 24 hours. And nothing, absolutely nothing, crossed back over that line. This method exists because of a quiet phenomenon that sabotages nearly every senior's decluttering attempt: the rescue. You make a good decision in the afternoon, and at 9 o'clock at night, you find yourself standing over the donation bag, pulling things back out. Not because you need them, because the silence of the evening lets the fear speak again. The Genkan line ends the negotiation. The decision was made by daytime Margaret, with clear eyes and Mrs. Tanaka's methods. Nighttime Margaret was not allowed to overrule her. She also did something practical that I want every one of you to copy. Before she started, before a single drawer was opened, she scheduled the exits: a charity pickup for the next morning, a neighbor's grandson with a truck for the furniture, the recycling center's hours written on a note by the door. The stuff had somewhere to go before she ever touched it. That is the difference between decluttering and simply moving piles from one room to another. By sunset, her hallway looked like a small, orderly harbor, boxes labeled for donation, bags for recycling, a short row of furniture waiting by the wall. And Margaret noticed something she didn't expect. Walking past that hallway didn't hurt. It felt like watching a tide go out. Natural, unhurried, already decided. And now we've arrived. Number 3, the one I promised you at the beginning. The one Margaret almost skipped, and the one that changed her life, not just her house. 3. Mirai no Watashi, the future me. Here is the method Margaret almost skipped because on the surface it sounds like nothing at all. One question asked of every object she wasn't sure about: does this serve the person I am becoming, or does it anchor me to a past that is already complete? Read that again. A past that is already complete, not a past that failed, not a past to be ashamed of. Complete. Finished the way a good book is finished, honored precisely by being closed. Most of us declutter facing backwards. We ask, how can I bear to part with this? That question has no good answer, which is why we stand frozen in front of closets for years. Margaret turned around and faced forward, and the moment she did, the entire house changed shape. Her sewing room went first. For a decade it had held the supplies of a hobby that had quietly ended, and for a decade she had felt guilty every time she passed the door. The future Margaret, she realized, didn't sew. The future Margaret wanted to paint with watercolors, something she had promised herself since Kobe. Out went the fabric mountains, and suddenly there was a room with a north light, waiting. Then came the hardest hour of the entire 24, Frank's things. His closet, untouched for 2 years. His reading chair, the drawer of his everyday objects that she had not been able to open since the funeral. And here, Mirai no Watashi did something no other method could do. It gave her permission, not to erase him, never that, but to ask which of his things brought her comfort and which brought only pain that she had mistaken for loyalty. She kept his reading glasses because they made her smile. His wool cardigan because it still felt like an embrace. The photographs, everyone. But the shirts still holding their dry-cleaning tags, the tools of hobbies that were his and not hers. The closet kept as a shrine. She understood finally that a shrine is for visiting, not for living in. Frank had loved her forward through 40 years of life. Keeping her frozen was the one thing he would never have wanted. She released his things to families who needed them, and she said out loud, alone in the bedroom, "You are not in the shirts. You were never in the shirts." That was the moment, Margaret says, when the house stopped being something she was losing and became something she was leaving. The way you leave a harbor. Who is your future self? Not who you were, who you are becoming in the chapter that starts now. Tell me one thing that person needs, and one thing that person no longer needs, in the comments. Sometimes declaring it makes it real. 2. Mono no Kuyo, the farewell for objects. In Japan there is a tradition so old and so tender that it may change how you think about everything you own. It is called Kuyo, a ceremony of gratitude. Every February in temples across Japan, seamstresses bring their broken needles and lay them to rest in blocks of soft tofu, thanking them for years of faithful service. Not thrown away. Thanked and released. Hari Kuyo, the funeral for needles, has been held for over 400 years. Margaret didn't have a temple. She had a kitchen table and one candle, but she understood the principle. Guilt comes from sneaking things out of the house like evidence. Gratitude comes from saying goodbye properly. So for each major category she released, she held a small, quiet ceremony. 30 seconds, sometimes a minute. It sounds sentimental. It is actually the most practical method on this entire list, because it is the one that prevents regret. Regret is what sends people back to the donation bags at midnight. She held her mother's mixing bowls and thanked them, out loud, for 1,000 family dinners before passing them to the young couple down the street who were just learning to cook. She slipped small notes into books before donating them. This one helped me through 1994. I hope it finds you when you need it. She photographed every piece of her children's artwork she wasn't keeping, made a little digital album, and thanked the paper drawings for their service before letting them go. When her children received the album, her son called in tears. He had never seen most of those drawings. For 30 years they had been kept, and no one had ever looked at them. Now everyone could. Even the broken things received their moment. The worn-out sweater that had survived 20 winters. The lamp that no longer lit. Thank you. You served. Rest now. She laughed at herself the first time. By the 5th time, she wasn't laughing. She was noticing that every goodbye felt finished, sealed, peaceful, done, in a way that no garbage bag had ever felt. This is what Western advice misses when it tells you to be ruthless and feel nothing. Your objects carried your life. Pretending they meant nothing is a lie, and lies leave residue. Kuyo tells the truth. This mattered, and it is over. And the truth is what lets you sleep at night with an empty hallway and a quiet heart. Have you ever felt guilt when letting go of something sentimental? Tell me in the comments what a small farewell ceremony might look like for you. I have a feeling some of these answers will be beautiful. And now, number 1. The method Margaret carried into her new home and the reason her story doesn't end with a moving truck. 1. Ma, the honored emptiness. When the truck pulled away at 9 the next morning, exactly 24 hours after she began, Margaret walked back into her house one last time. The rooms were empty, and she waited for the grief to come. And instead something else arrived. Stillness. The kind of stillness she hadn't felt since Kobe, standing in Mrs. Tanaka's spare, sunlit rooms, wondering why a home with so little in it could feel so full. That is ma, the space between. In Japanese thought, emptiness is not absence. It is presence of a different kind. The pause in music is part of the music. The white space in a painting is part of the painting, and the empty shelf in a home is part of the home, the part where calm lives. Here is the method, and it is the simplest and the hardest of all 9. When you clear a space, do not refill it. The empty drawer stays empty. The cleared shelf stays cleared. You do not owe emptiness an explanation, and you do not owe it a new set of baskets from the store. Because this is the trap that catches almost everyone. We clear our homes and then treat the space as a vacancy to be filled, and within a year the tide of objects has returned. Ma says, the space was the goal. The space is the reward. In her new apartment, small, bright 4 rooms, Margaret made herself one rule. Every room keeps one empty shelf, permanently. Not for guests, not for storage, not for later. Empty, the way a garden keeps a clearing. Visitors always notice it, she says, even when they can't say why. The room simply feels like it can breathe. And when new things enter her life now, as they always do, the question is no longer, where will I put this? It is this worth disturbing the MA? Most things, it turns out, are not. This is what our poll of thousands of you confirmed and what Margaret learned in 24 hours. What we truly want from our homes is not organization for its own sake. It is calm. And calm, the Japanese discovered centuries ago, is not something you add to a home. It is something you uncover. It was there all along, underneath everything else. 3 months after the move, Margaret called her daughter and said something I'll never forget when it was shared with me. I thought I was emptying the house. I was actually making room for the rest of my life. She teaches a watercolor class at her senior center now. She hosts tea for new friends in an apartment that takes 11 minutes to reset completely. And on her one empty shelf in the living room sits nothing at all, except, on certain afternoons, the sunlight. You will move through your own home tomorrow regardless. You will open the closets, walk past the boxes, feel the weight or not feel it. The question is only whether your home goes on holding your past or starts holding your peace. If Margaret's story moved you, hit the like button and share this video with someone who is facing a lifetime of belongings and doesn't know where to start. Which of the 9 methods will you begin with? Tell me in the comments. I read and respond to every single one. And if you're ready to make this next chapter your calmest one, subscribe and ring the bell, because every week we bring you the Japanese methods that turn a house full of things into a home full of quiet. Japan figured something out, and it translates.